Case 1. WANETA HOYT, the Suffocation Mother. Our first case takes us back to the 1970s and 80s, when medical science was still grappling with the mysterious phenomenon known as sudden infant death syndrome. In the small community of Newark, New Jersey, one mother seemed to be cursed with the worst luck imaginable. Between 1965 and 1971, WANETA HOYT lost 5 of her children to what doctors initially believed were tragic cases of SIDS. But 3 decades later, the truth would emerge, revealing one of the most calculated and cold-blooded serial killings in American history. WANETA Ethel Nixon was born on May 9, 1946, in Richford, New York, just across the state line from New Jersey. She married Timothy Hoyt in 1964, and the young couple settled in Newark, New Jersey, ready to start their family. Their first child, Eric, was born on October 17, 1964. He would live only 3 months. On January 26, 1965, WANETA called emergency services in hysterics, claiming she had found her baby son unresponsive in his crib. Despite efforts to revive him, Eric was pronounced dead. The cause was listed as SIDS, and the community rallied around the grieving young mother. Just 11 months later, on November 19, 1965, WANETA gave birth to her second child, a daughter named Julie. The baby girl seemed healthy and thriving until September 5, 1968, when she was found dead at 2 years and 8 months old. Once again, WANETA reported finding her daughter unresponsive. Once again, the death was attributed to SIDS, though Julie's age made it unusual, as SIDS typically affects infants under 1 year old. Still, medical examiners gave WANETA the benefit of the doubt, assuming she was simply an unlucky mother facing incomprehensible tragedy. The pattern continued with horrifying consistency. James Hoyt was born on May 31, 1966. He died on September 23, 1968, at just 2 years and 3 months old. WANETA's story was the same. She had checked on him and found him not breathing. The medical community began to take notice of this family's string of losses, but rather than suspecting foul play, they viewed WANETA as a medical anomaly, a mother whose genetic makeup somehow predisposed her children to respiratory failure. Molly Hoyt arrived on March 18, 1969, and lived until June 5, 1970, dying at just 2 months and 17 days old. By now, some medical professionals were beginning to question the statistical impossibility of so many SIDS deaths in one family. But WANETA's apparent grief and cooperation with medical studies kept suspicion at bay. She even allowed researchers to monitor her children, hoping to unlock the secrets of SIDS. The final victim was Noah Hoyt, born on May 9, 1971. Unlike his siblings, Noah was extensively monitored by medical professionals at Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, as researchers desperately tried to understand why this family kept losing children. Despite round-the-clock monitoring equipment, Noah died on July 28, 1971, at just 2 months and 19 days old. WANETA claimed she had found him tangled in his monitoring wires, unable to breathe. For over 2 decades, WANETA Hoyt was viewed as a tragic figure, a mother who had endured unspeakable loss. She even became a case study in medical literature, with her children's death cited in research papers about SIDS and familial patterns of infant mortality. Medical professionals referenced the Hoyt children when discussing genetic predisposition to sudden infant death. WANETA and Timothy moved on with their lives, eventually adopting a son who survived to adulthood. But in 1994, everything changed. Dr. Lyndon Norton, a forensic pathologist, began reviewing historical SIDS cases and became suspicious of the Hoyt family deaths. The statistical probability of 5 children in one family dying of natural causes was astronomically low, essentially impossible. She contacted the New York State Police, who launched an investigation that would eventually involve New Jersey authorities. On March 23, 1994, investigators brought WANETA in for questioning. After several hours of interrogation, WANETA confessed to murdering all 5 of her children. Her method was chillingly simple and brutally effective. She had suffocated each child, pressing her hand or a pillow over their nose and mouth until they stopped breathing. She described the murders with disturbing calmness, explaining that the babies wouldn't stop crying, that she felt overwhelmed, that she just needed them to be quiet. The details of her confession were horrifying. She admitted to suffocating Eric when he was just 3 months old because his crying irritated her. With Julie, she waited until the child was almost 3 years old before killing her during a tantrum. James died the same way, suffocated while crying in his crib. Molly never had a chance, killed at just over 2 months old. And Noah, despite being monitored by medical equipment, was murdered when WANETA deliberately disconnected his monitors and suffocated him, later claiming the wires had accidentally strangled him. The confession sent shockwaves through the medical community. For over 20 years, WANETA HOYT's case had been cited in medical literature as evidence of familial SIDS patterns. Researchers had built theories on her children's deaths. The case raised profound questions about how easily the medical establishment could be deceived when a killer wore the mask of a grieving mother. WANETA's trial began in March 1995 in Tioga County, New York, though New Jersey authorities assisted with the prosecution due to the Newark deaths. Her defense team attempted to have her confession suppressed, arguing it had been coerced, but the judge ruled it admissible. They then argued that WANETA suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The prosecution countered that this was simply a case of a mother who killed her children when their normal infant behavior became inconvenient. The jury heard testimony from medical experts who explained that true SIDS was incredibly rare, and having 5 cases in one family was medically impossible. They heard from detectives who described WANETA's calm demeanor during her confession. Perhaps most damning was the testimony about Noah's death, where medical equipment had been monitoring the infant continuously, yet WANETA had managed to disconnect the alarms and suffocate her son. On September 11, 1995, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found WANETA HOYT guilty on 5 counts of second-degree murder. At her sentencing on October 10, 1995, the judge sentenced her to 75 years to life in prison, ensuring she would never again have the opportunity to harm a child. WANETA HOYT died in prison on August 13, 1998, at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York, just 3 years into her sentence. She was 52 years old. Even in death, she never showed remorse for stealing the lives of 5 innocent children. The Hoyt case revolutionized how medical professionals approach multiple SIDS deaths in a single family and serves as a grim reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. Case 2. Michelle Lodzinski, the disappearing son. On May 25, 1991, Memorial Day, thousands of New Jersey families gathered at carnivals and festivals to celebrate the holiday weekend. At the Sayreville War Memorial Park, one mother would report her 5-year-old son missing, triggering a massive search that would end in heartbreak and launch a mystery that wouldn't be solved for over 2 decades. The story of Michelle Lodzinski and her son Timothy Wiltsey represents one of New Jersey's most disturbing cold cases. Michelle Lodzinski was born on August 14, 1967, in South Amboy, New Jersey. She grew up in a working-class family in Sayreville and seemed to follow a typical path through life. She gave birth to Timothy Edwin Wiltsey on March 25, 1986. The father was not consistently involved, and Michelle raised the boy largely on her own. By all outward appearances, Michelle was a devoted single mother. Neighbors often saw her playing with Timothy, and family members saw no signs of neglect or abuse. Memorial Day 1991 started as a celebration. According to Michelle's initial statement to police, they arrived at the carnival around 6:30 in the evening. At approximately 9:15, Michelle approached a Sayreville police officer working security at the carnival in a panic. She reported that Timothy was missing, that she had briefly turned her attention away to purchase soda, and when she looked back, her 5-year-old son had vanished. The search expanded rapidly as darkness fell. Carnival workers were questioned, rides were stopped and searched, and volunteers combed nearby woods and waterways. Michelle provided a recent photograph showing Timothy in a distinctive blue and white tie-dyed shirt, blue shorts, and white sneakers. As midnight approached with no sign of Timothy, this was being treated as a potential abduction. However, as investigators dug deeper, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. Several carnival workers told police they remembered seeing Michelle at the carnival, but they couldn't remember seeing her with a child. The refreshment stand vendor didn't recall serving her. Most significantly, police discovered that Michelle had actually called to report Timothy missing from the carnival earlier in the day, around 2:30 in the afternoon, but then called back 30 minutes later to say she had found him. When confronted with these discrepancies, Michelle changed her story. She now claimed that Timothy had actually disappeared earlier in the day, around 2:30, near a cake sale at the carnival. This new timeline and location raised even more red flags for investigators. Why would a mother lie about when and where her child disappeared? The search for Timothy Wiltsey continued for months. His picture appeared on milk cartons and missing children bulletins across the country. Michelle appeared on television programs appealing for information. The case gained national attention, with shows like Unsolved Mysteries featuring Timothy's disappearance. Then, on April 23, 1992, nearly 11 months after Timothy vanished, a terrible discovery was made. Two men searching for recyclable materials in a marshy area of Raritan Center in Edison, New Jersey, approximately 15 miles from where Timothy disappeared, found skeletal remains. It took several weeks of forensic analysis before investigators could confirm through dental records that the bones belonged to Timothy Wiltsey. The little boy who had disappeared from a carnival had been dead for nearly a year. The autopsy could not definitively determine cause of death due to advanced decomposition, but the manner of death was ruled a homicide. The discovery of Timothy's body shifted the investigation entirely. Investigators re-examined every aspect of Michelle Lodzinski's story. They discovered that the blue and white tie-dyed shirt she claimed Timothy was wearing had never been found. They learned that Michelle had a history of making false claims and exaggerating situations for attention. Perhaps most damning, they found that Michelle had access to the Raritan Center area where Timothy's body was discovered. She had worked in that business park in the past and knew the remote locations where a body might be hidden. Despite mounting suspicions, prosecutors felt they lacked sufficient evidence to charge Michelle with murder. The case went cold, remaining unsolved through the 1990s and into the 2000s. Michelle moved on with her life, eventually leaving New Jersey and settling in Florida, where she started a new family and had 2 more children. But investigators never forgot Timothy Wiltsey. In August 2014, 23 years after Timothy's disappearance, Michelle Lodzinski was arrested in Florida and charged with murder. The prosecution's case, presented at trial in March 2016, was entirely circumstantial but compelling. They established that Michelle's changing stories about when and where Timothy disappeared indicated consciousness of guilt. They presented evidence that the distinctive tie-dyed shirt she claimed Timothy was wearing had conveniently appeared in her apartment days after his disappearance, found by police during a search, suggesting she had fabricated the description of his clothing to mislead the investigation. Expert witnesses testified about the location where Timothy's body was found, explaining that the remote area in Raritan Center was not a place a 5-year-old child would wander to on his own, and not a location where an opportunistic kidnapper would likely take a victim. Case 3. Carmen Mercado, the bathtub killer. On November 2, 2009, in Buena Vista, Atlantic County, emergency services received a frantic call from Carmen Mercado. She reported that her 5-year-old son, Caden, was unresponsive in the bathtub. What Carmen initially claimed was a tragic accident would be exposed as calculated violence against a defenseless child. Carmen Luz Mercado was born on June 7, 1979, in Camden, New Jersey. She dropped out of high school and had her first child, Alyssa, at age 21. In 2003, Carmen became involved with Michael Reynolds. In June 2004, she gave birth to Caden Michael Reynolds. Those who knew the family described Caden as sweet and gentle, but Carmen's relationship with him was strained. By 2009, Carmen and Michael's relationship had deteriorated completely. Carmen was working part-time and struggling financially. Neighbors sometimes heard yelling coming from her apartment, and Carmen seemed increasingly stressed in the months leading up to November 2009. According to Carmen's initial statement, she gave Caden a bath to help him feel better since he wasn't feeling well. She claimed she left him in the bathtub to answer a phone call, and when she returned 15 to 20 minutes later, she found him submerged and unresponsive. Carmen called 911 at 11:47 that morning. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. What they found contradicted Carmen's story in several critical ways. Caden's body temperature was significantly lower than it should have been if he had only been in the water 15 to 20 minutes. The bathwater itself was cold. Caden showed no signs that CPR had been attempted. Most disturbingly, paramedics found extensive bruising on his shoulders, back, and the back of his head, consistent with someone being forcefully held underwater. The child's fingernails were broken and torn, as if he had struggled desperately. These were not injuries of accidental drowning, but of a child who had fought for his life. Caden was rushed to Atlanticare Regional Medical Center, but he had been without oxygen too long. He was pronounced dead at 1:23 that afternoon. The emergency room physician immediately contacted Child Protective Services and police. An autopsy revealed Caden died of asphyxiation by drowning, but this was no accident. The bruising pattern indicated someone had forcefully held him face down in water. The injuries to his fingernails showed he had clawed at the bathtub and possibly at his attacker. Petechiae in Caden's eyes indicated prolonged oxygen deprivation, suggesting he had been held underwater for several minutes while struggling. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide. On November 4, 2009, Carmen Mercado was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators found a journal with entries about feeling trapped by motherhood and resenting Caden. One entry from October read, "Sometimes I just want to make it all stop. I can't do this anymore." Perhaps most chilling were internet searches found on Carmen's laptop. In the weeks before Caden's death, Carmen had repeatedly searched for information about child drowning accidents, how long it takes for a child to drown, and whether drowning leaves evidence of foul play. When confronted with this evidence during interrogation, Carmen's story changed multiple times. Finally, she admitted she had held Caden under the water, but claimed it was only for a few seconds to discipline him, and she didn't mean to kill him. This contradicted all physical evidence, showing Caden had been held underwater for several minutes while struggling violently. Carmen's trial began in September 2010. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, medical testimony, and Carmen's own damning journal entries and internet searches. On October 19, 2010, after deliberating for just 6 hours, the jury returned guilty verdicts on first-degree murder. At sentencing on December 3, 2010, the judge sentenced Carmen Mercado to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He stated, "You held your 5-year-old son underwater while he fought for his life, and then you lied about it. There is no punishment severe enough for what you have done." Carmen Mercado is currently incarcerated at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey. Caden's grave reads, "Caden Michael Reynolds, beloved son and brother, forever 5 years old, now safe in the arms of angels." Case 4. Julie Skinnecker, the Mission Killer. Though technically a Florida case, Julie Skinnecker's connection to New Jersey through her military family background and the extensive coverage her case received in Garden State media warrants her inclusion in this examination of maternal evil. On January 28, 2011, in Tampa, Florida, Julie Skinnecker executed what she would later describe as her mission, murdering her 2 teenage children in cold blood because they were mouthy and didn't listen to her. The calculated nature of her crimes, combined with her complete lack of remorse, secured her place among the most evil mothers in recent American history. Julie Powers was born on March 5, 1960, in New Jersey to a military family. Her father was a career Army officer, and the family moved frequently during her childhood, living on various military bases throughout the United States and Europe. Despite the instability of constant relocation, Julie was described as an intelligent and capable student who excelled academically. She attended Middlebury College in Vermont, graduating with honors in 1982 with a degree in Russian language and literature. After college, Julie followed her father's footsteps into military service, joining the United States Army and serving as a military intelligence officer. During her service, she met Captain Parker Skinnecker, also an Army intelligence officer, and the couple married in 1986. Their early married life was marked by the typical challenges faced by military families: frequent moves, long deployments, and the stress of classified work in high-pressure environments. However, those who knew the couple during this period described them as devoted to each other and excited about starting a family. Their daughter, Calyx Powers Skinnecker, was born on December 15, 1993, while the family was stationed in Germany. Calyx was described as a bright, energetic child who adapted well to military life, making friends easily despite frequent moves. The family's son, Bo Powers Skinecker, was born on March 21, 1996, completing what appeared to be an ideal military family. Parker's career progressed steadily, eventually achieving the rank of colonel, while Julie left active duty to focus on raising their children. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family, serious problems were developing. Julie began showing signs of mental illness in her early 30s, experiencing severe depression and manic episodes. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and began a long journey through various medications and treatment protocols. The condition was exacerbated by alcohol abuse, and Julie was hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric treatment. Despite these challenges, the family remained intact, with Parker supporting his wife's treatment and shielding their children from the worst of her symptoms. By 2010, the Skinecker family was living in Tampa, Florida, where Parker was stationed at MacDill Air Force Base. Calix was 16 years old and a junior at King High School, where she was a member of the school's soccer team and maintained good grades. Bo was 13 and an 8th grader at Liberty Middle School, passionate about football and video games. To outsiders, they appeared to be typical teenagers, navigating the usual challenges of adolescence with the added complexity of military family life. However, Julie's mental health had deteriorated significantly. She was taking multiple psychiatric medications, including antidepressants and mood stabilizers, but frequently mixed them with alcohol despite explicit warnings from her doctors. Her relationship with her children had become strained, with Julie increasingly focused on perceived slights and disrespect. She kept journals filled with complaints about Calix and Bo, describing them as ungrateful, disrespectful, and deliberately provocative. These journal entries would later reveal a woman descending into paranoid delusions about her own children. Parker Skinecker was aware of his wife's struggles, but felt powerless to help her. He was preparing for a deployment to Qatar and worried about leaving Julie alone with the children, but he had little choice given his military obligations. In January 2011, he arranged for his mother to come stay with the family to provide support, but those plans would prove to be tragically insufficient. On January 27, 2011, the day before the murders, Julie drove to a local shooting range where she was a member. She purchased a semi-automatic pistol, telling the range staff she wanted something for home protection. Under Florida law, there was no waiting period for firearms purchases, and Julie's clean criminal record and military background made the sale routine. She bought ammunition and had the staff show her how to load and operate the weapon. She then went home and spent the evening online, searching for information about where to shoot someone to ensure death and how to clean up blood evidence. The next morning, January 28th, Parker Skinecker left for work at MacDill Air Force Base, leaving Julie at home with the children. It was a Friday, and both Calix and Bo were scheduled to go to school. What happened next was described in chilling detail in Julie's own words during her police interrogation. At approximately 7:30 that morning, Julie drove Bo to his football practice at Liberty Middle School. As he sat in the front passenger seat of the family's vehicle, talking about an upcoming game, Julie pulled out the pistol she had purchased the day before. Without warning or hesitation, she shot her 13-year-old son twice in the head at point-blank range. Bo died instantly, his body slumping in the seat as Julie calmly drove back home with his corpse beside her. Julie left Bo's body in the vehicle and went into the house, where she found Calix in her bedroom doing homework. The 16-year-old looked up at her mother, and Julie shot her in the face. As Calix fell, still alive, Julie stood over her daughter and shot her again in the head, ensuring her death. She then dragged Calix's body down the hallway, leaving a trail of blood, and positioned it on a couch in the living room. After killing both of her children, Julie wrote rambling letters attempting to explain her actions. In these notes, she described her children as mouthy and said they talked back and didn't show her proper respect. She wrote that she had been pushed to the brink by their behavior and that killing them was the only solution. She complained that Calix gave her the finger and Bo called her names. She described the murders as her mission, a term she used repeatedly, treating the execution of her own children as if it were a military operation. Julie then called her mother and left a rambling voicemail admitting to the murders. She spent the rest of the day in the house with her children's bodies, drinking and writing in her journal. When Parker returned home from work that evening around 6:30, he found a scene of horror that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His wife passed out on a sofa, their daughter's body on another couch, blood throughout the house, and his son's body still in the vehicle in the garage. Parker immediately called 911, screaming that his children had been killed and his wife had done it. Police arrived within minutes and found Julie in a stupor, barely conscious from a combination of alcohol and medications. When officers roused her and asked what had happened, she matter-of-factly stated, "I shot my kids." She showed no emotion, no grief, no remorse, just a flat acknowledgement of what she had done. Julie was arrested and taken to the hospital for evaluation before being transferred to the Hillsborough County Jail. During her police interrogation the following day, she provided a detailed account of the murders, describing them as calmly as if she were recounting a trip to the grocery store. She explained that she had planned the murders for several days, that she had specifically chosen times when she and the children would be alone, and that she had shot them because they were impossible to control and made her life miserable. The interrogation video, later played at trial, shocked viewers with its depiction of a mother showing absolutely no remorse for murdering her own children. When asked if she understood that Calix and Bo were dead and would never come back, Julie responded, "Yes, I know. That was the point." When asked if she was sorry, she said, "I'm sorry I had children who drove me to this. I'm sorry they turned out the way they did." Julie's trial began in April 2014, more than 3 years after the murders. Her defense team argued that she was legally insane at the time of the killings, unable to distinguish right from wrong due to severe mental illness. They presented testimony from psychiatrists who diagnosed Julie with bipolar disorder, depression, and possible psychotic episodes. They argued that her purchase of the gun, her internet searches, and her actions after the murders demonstrated someone in the grip of severe mental illness. The prosecution countered that while Julie certainly suffered from mental health issues, she knew exactly what she was doing when she killed her children. They pointed to her careful planning, purchasing the gun the day before, researching where to shoot for maximum lethality, choosing times when she would be alone with each child, and her statements referring to the murders as her mission. They argued that Julie was angry at her children for typical teenage behavior and decided to kill them, then attempted to hide behind an insanity defense. The jury heard from forensic pathologists who described the children's injuries in detail. Bo had been shot twice in the right side of his head, the bullets entering just above his ear and traveling through his brain. He died so quickly, he likely never knew what was happening. Calix had been shot in the face first, with the bullet entering through her mouth and exiting through the back of her head. When that didn't immediately kill her, Julie had shot her again in the temple, ensuring her death. The forensic evidence showed that Calix had tried to lift her arms to protect herself during the second shot, indicating she knew her mother was killing her. Parker Skinecker testified about the deterioration of his wife's mental health and his fears about leaving her alone with the children. He described coming home to find his children murdered and the devastating impact on his life. Through tears, he told the jury about Calix's dreams of playing college soccer and Bo's infectious enthusiasm for football. He described the children they would never become, the lives that were stolen from them by the person who should have loved and protected them above all others. On May 10, 2014, after deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury rejected the insanity defense and found Julie Skinecker guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The verdict brought a measure of justice for Calix and Bo, though nothing could restore the lives they lost. At sentencing on May 22, 2014, the judge sentenced Julie to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would die in prison. However, in a stunning development, the conviction was overturned on appeal in 2016 due to procedural errors during the trial. In November 2016, Julie was retried on the same charges. This time, she was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder, and in May 2017, she was again sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences. The different verdict resulted from the jury's decision that while the murders were intentional, they were not premeditated to the degree required for first-degree murder, a conclusion that baffled many observers given the evidence of planning. Julie Skinecker is currently incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, where she will remain for the rest of her life. Prison staff report that she shows little interest in interacting with other inmates and spends most of her time in her cell. She has never expressed genuine remorse for her actions, maintaining that she was driven to murder her children by their behavior and her mental illness. The impact of Julie's crimes extends far beyond her immediate victims. Parker Skinnecker, who lost his entire family in one horrific day, struggled profoundly with survivors' guilt and grief. He retired from the military and has largely avoided public life, trying to process a trauma that defies comprehension. Extended family members, including Calix and Beau's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, have had to live with the knowledge that two bright, promising teenagers were murdered by their own mother for the crime of being mouthy. The case raised important questions about mental health treatment, particularly for military families where high-stress environments and frequent moves can exacerbate existing conditions. It highlighted the dangerous intersection of untreated mental illness, substance abuse, and access to firearms. And it served as a grim reminder that mental illness, while it may explain behavior, does not excuse it, particularly when that behavior results in the cold-blooded murder of innocent children. Today, friends and family remember Calix and Beau Skinnecker as typical teenagers full of potential, dreams, and life. Calix loved soccer and had been looking at colleges with strong athletic programs. Beau was passionate about football and video games and had recently made the honor roll at school. They deserved to grow up, to graduate from high school, to go to college, to fall in love, to build their own lives. Instead, their lives were cut short by the one person who should have done anything and everything to protect them. Julie Skinnecker's actions represent a profound betrayal of the maternal bond and a level of evil that defies rational explanation. She will spend every remaining day of her life behind bars, never again feeling sunshine on her face or breathing free air. A small measure of justice for two teenagers whose only crime was being normal kids with a mother who viewed their typical adolescent behavior as worthy of execution. The tragedy of Calix and Beau Skinnecker serves as a permanent reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it comes from the person tucking you in at night, and when it does, the betrayal is absolute and the damage irreparable. Case 5. Zara Baker's stepmother Elisa, the erased child. Though Zara Baker's tragic story primarily unfolded in North Carolina, her stepmother Elisa Baker's connections to New Jersey and the extensive media coverage the case received in Garden State news outlets warrant its inclusion in this examination. In October 2010, the disappearance of 10-year-old Zara Baker shocked the nation and exposed one of the most heinous acts of maternal cruelty in modern American history. Zara, a child who had already endured bone cancer, the amputation of her leg, and profound hearing loss, suffered unimaginable abuse at the hands of her stepmother before being murdered and dismembered, her small body scattered across multiple locations in an attempt to hide the crime. Elisa Fairchild was born on September 4, 1973, in Morristown, New Jersey, to a working-class family. Her childhood was marked by instability, with her parents divorcing when she was 7 and her mother struggling with substance abuse issues. Elisa bounced between relatives' homes and spent brief periods in foster care, never establishing stable attachments or learning healthy relationship patterns. By her teenage years, she was heavily involved in drugs and petty crime, accumulating a criminal record that included theft, fraud, and drug possession. In her early 20s, Elisa moved between New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and eventually North Carolina, leaving a trail of failed relationships, abandoned children, and legal troubles in her wake. She had multiple children with different fathers, none of whom she maintained custody of for long. By all accounts, Elisa was a con artist and manipulator who used relationships to extract money and resources before moving on to the next victim. In 2008, while living in North Carolina, Elisa met Adam Baker through an online dating site. Adam was an Australian citizen who had immigrated to the United States and was working in construction. Most significantly, Adam had a young daughter named Zara living in Australia with her mother, Emily Dietrich. Adam and Emily had divorced acrimoniously, and Emily had primary custody of Zara, who had been diagnosed with bone cancer at age 5 and had undergone extensive treatment, including the amputation of her left leg and chemotherapy that left her profoundly deaf. Elisa, recognizing an opportunity, presented herself as a caring maternal figure who desperately wanted to help Adam reunite with his daughter. She convinced Adam that Zara would be better off in the United States with them, and despite Emily's reservations, legal complications and distance made it difficult for Emily to prevent Zara from moving to North Carolina in late 2009. The 10-year-old girl, already facing tremendous physical challenges, was placed in the care of a father she barely knew and a stepmother who viewed her as an inconvenience. From the moment Zara arrived in North Carolina, Elisa began a campaign of systematic abuse and isolation. The little girl, who wore a prosthetic leg and hearing aids, was kept out of school despite North Carolina's compulsory education laws. Elisa told neighbors and authorities that Zara was being homeschooled, but no educational activities were taking place. Instead, Zara was confined to her bedroom for most of the day, given minimal food, and subjected to physical and emotional abuse. Neighbors later testified that they rarely saw Zara, and when they did, she appeared frightened and withdrawn. On the few occasions when neighbors tried to interact with the child, Elisa would quickly intervene, making excuses about why Zara couldn't come out to play or why she looked so thin and pale. One neighbor recalled seeing Zara looking out her bedroom window with a haunted expression, but when she waved, Elisa appeared and pulled the curtain shut. The abuse escalated throughout 2010. Zara was beaten regularly, forced to sleep in the bathtub as punishment, and denied adequate food and medical care. Despite her prosthetic leg requiring regular adjustments as she grew, Elisa refused to take her to appointments. The child's hearing aids were often taken away as punishment, leaving her completely isolated in a world of silence. Adam Baker, working long hours and dominated by Elisa's personality, either didn't notice or chose not to see what was happening to his daughter. By September 2010, Elisa had decided that Zara had become too much of a burden. In conversations with acquaintances captured in phone records and witness testimony, Elisa complained about having to care for a disabled child who wasn't even hers. She researched on the internet about how to get rid of a child, how to report a child as a runaway, and disturbingly, about body decomposition and dismemberment. These searches would later prove crucial in demonstrating premeditation. On September 24, 2010, Elisa made a phone call to a friend in New Jersey, complaining about Zara and saying she wished the child would just disappear. Investigators believe that within hours of that conversation, Elisa murdered 10-year-old Zara. The exact method of death was never conclusively determined because of how Elisa disposed of the body, but forensic evidence suggested Zara was struck in the head with a blunt object, possibly a baseball bat, causing fatal trauma. After killing Zara, Elisa did something that shocked even hardened investigators. She dismembered the child's small body. Using tools from Adam's construction equipment, she cut Zara into pieces, then scattered the remains across multiple locations in Catawba and Caldwell counties in North Carolina. She placed some remains in areas where she thought they would decompose quickly, and others in locations where they might never be found. She cleaned the crime scene meticulously, using bleach and other chemicals to destroy evidence. For over a month, Elisa and Adam pretended Zara was alive. When Elisa's mother visited from New Jersey in October, Elisa claimed Zara was away at a friend's house. When neighbors asked about the little girl they hadn't seen in weeks, Elisa said she was sick with the flu. When school officials inquired about why Zara wasn't enrolled, Elisa provided false documentation claiming the child was receiving private tutoring. The deception continued until Elisa realized she needed to report Zara missing to prevent further questions. On October 9, 2010, Adam Baker called 911 to report that someone had left a ransom note in his car, claiming they had kidnapped Zara. The note, investigators would later prove, had been written by Elisa herself. Police responded to the home in Hickory, North Carolina, and immediately became suspicious. The ransom note made no sense, demanding no specific ransom amount and providing no instructions for payment. More significantly, neither Adam nor Elisa seemed particularly distressed about their missing daughter. When police asked to see Zara's bedroom, they found a bare mattress with no sheets or blankets, minimal clothing, and no personal items or toys, nothing to suggest a child actually lived there. The prosthetic leg Zara would have needed to walk was in the closet, making Elisa's claim that she had run away impossible. As investigators pressed Adam and Elisa about when they had last seen Zara, their stories contradicted each other and changed repeatedly. Within hours, the investigation shifted from a potential kidnapping to a suspected homicide, with Elisa as the primary suspect. Police obtained search warrants for the Baker home and vehicles, discovering luminol-positive blood evidence throughout the house, particularly in Zara's bedroom and the bathtub. Forensic analysis would later confirm this was Zara's blood. In the garage, investigators found saws and cutting tools with microscopic traces of human tissue. Elisa's computer and phone records revealed her disturbing internet searches about body disposal and her complaints about Zara to friends and family. Most damningly, cell phone tower data placed Elisa's phone at multiple locations where Zara's remains would later be found, often in the middle of the night when she claimed to have been home sleeping. As evidence mounted, Elisa hired an attorney and refused to cooperate with investigators. Adam, realizing the horrific truth, eventually told police that he had last actually seen his daughter alive in mid-September, and that Elisa had claimed Zara was sick and sleeping whenever he asked about her. He admitted that he had been afraid of Elisa and had essentially abandoned his daughter to her stepmother's cruelty. The search for Zara's remains became a massive operation, with hundreds of law enforcement officers, volunteers, and search and rescue teams combing through wooded areas, waterways, and brush across 2 counties. On October 27, 2010, the first remains were discovered in a wooded area off Gunpowder Road in Caldwell County. Zara's prosthetic leg, still attached to what was left of her real leg, both severed at the hip. Over the following weeks, more of Zara's remains were found at various locations. Her skull was discovered in a different area, her arms in another, her torso in yet another spot. Each discovery was heartbreaking, revealing the deliberate dismemberment of a child's body by someone who should have been protecting her. Forensic anthropologists worked painstakingly to identify the remains, using Zara's medical records, X-rays from her cancer treatment, and DNA analysis. The medical examiner determined that Zara had died from blunt force trauma to the head, though the exact weapon was never recovered. Elisa had apparently destroyed or disposed of it along with other evidence. The dismemberment had been performed post-mortem, a small mercy in a case filled with horror. Analysis of the remains suggested they had been exposed to the elements for at least 2 weeks before the missing persons report was filed, confirming that Elisa had murdered Zara well before reporting her missing. On November 11, 2010, Elisa Baker was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, along with multiple charges of obstruction of justice, desecration of remains, and filing false police reports. The murder charge was eventually reduced from first to second degree as part of a plea negotiation, with prosecutors deciding that ensuring Elisa's conviction and life imprisonment was more important than pursuing a trial that might result in acquittal if jurors couldn't definitively prove premeditation. Adam Baker was charged with obstruction of justice and contributing to the delinquency of a minor for his failure to protect Zara or report her disappearance. He accepted a plea deal and served 18 months in prison before being deported to Australia. His failure to protect his daughter, while not rising to the level of Elisa's evil, represented a profound betrayal of parental responsibility that haunted him for the rest of his life. Elisa's trial proceedings stretched over several months as defense attorneys and prosecutors negotiated. On September 15, 2011, Elisa Baker pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and related charges in exchange for prosecutors agreeing not to seek additional charges. At her sentencing hearing on November 12, 2011, the courtroom was packed with people from around the world who had followed Zara's case and wanted to see justice served. Victim impact statements were read on behalf of Zara's biological mother, Emily Dietrich, who had not seen her daughter in over a year before her murder and was devastated by guilt over allowing Zara to move to the United States. Emily described her beautiful, resilient daughter who had fought cancer and learned to walk with a prosthetic leg, who communicated joyfully despite her deafness, who deserved a life full of love and opportunity. Instead, Emily said, Zara had been tortured, murdered, and literally torn apart by a woman who should have cared for her. The judge, visibly emotional, sentenced Elisa Baker to between 14 years and 4 months and 18 years and 1 month in prison for the murder conviction, with additional consecutive sentences for obstruction of justice and other charges, bringing her total sentence to a minimum of 33 years and a maximum of 41 years. While not technically a life sentence, given Elisa's age, she would be in her late 60s at the earliest possible release date, and prosecutors indicated they would fight any parole application. In his sentencing remarks, the judge stated, Zara Claire Baker was a child who had already suffered more than most people endure in a lifetime. She had cancer, she lost her leg, she lost her hearing. She deserved compassion, care, and protection. Instead, you subjected her to abuse, isolation, and ultimately murder. You then compounded your crimes by dismembering her small body and scattering her remains, denying her even the dignity of a proper burial. Your actions represent a level of depravity that shocks the conscience and offends every notion of human decency. Elisa Baker is currently incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Prison officials report that she is considered a model inmate, quiet and compliant, though she has never expressed genuine remorse for her crimes. In occasional prison interviews, she has attempted to minimize her responsibility, claiming Zara's death was an accident and that she only dismembered the body in a panic. This narrative contradicts all the evidence, including her own admissions during plea negotiations. The international attention to Zara's case led to important discussions about international child custody arrangements and the difficulty of monitoring children's welfare across borders. Emily Dietrich, Zara's mother, has been vocal about the failures in the system that allowed her daughter to be placed with a father she barely knew and a stepmother with a significant criminal history in multiple states, including New Jersey. In Zara's memory, a foundation was established to support children with cancer and hearing loss, providing resources and advocacy that Zara herself was denied. Communities in both Australia and North Carolina have created memorial gardens in her honor, places where people can reflect on a child's life cut short and recommit themselves to protecting vulnerable children from those who would harm them. The story of Zara Baker is particularly heartbreaking because of how much the child had already overcome before meeting Elisa Baker. She had survived bone cancer and amputation, adapted to using a prosthetic leg, learned to communicate despite profound deafness, and by all accounts remained a sweet, gentle child despite her challenges. She deserved to be cherished and protected, to receive the specialized care and support that would help her thrive despite her disabilities. Instead, she was systematically abused, isolated, murdered, and literally dismembered by a woman who viewed her as an inconvenience. The image of Zara's small prosthetic leg, found discarded in the woods still attached to what remained of her real leg, became a symbol of innocence destroyed and maternal responsibility violated in the most profound way imaginable. Elisa Baker will spend decades behind bars, probably dying in prison given her age and health issues. But no amount of incarceration can undo what she did to Zara, cannot restore the life she stole, cannot erase the suffering she inflicted on a disabled child who had already endured so much. Zara Baker's story serves as a permanent reminder that child protection systems must be more vigilant, that warning signs must not be ignored, and that the most dangerous person in a child's life can be the one who is supposed to be caring for them. Today, Zara would have been 25 years old, perhaps married with children of her own, perhaps pursuing a career, certainly living a life full of possibilities. Instead, she remains frozen at age 10, a child whose life was erased by evil wearing the mask of a stepmother. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her and those who never knew her but were moved by her story, a testament to resilience destroyed and innocence betrayed. Case 6. Michelle Kehoe, the almost successful killer. On October 26, 2008, in the small community of rural Iowa near the Nebraska border, Michelle Kehoe drove her two young sons to a remote location where she attempted to end all three of their lives in what police would describe as a meticulously planned family annihilation. While technically an Iowa case, Michelle Kehoe's New Jersey connections through extended family and the extensive coverage the case received nationally, including in Garden State media, merit its examination in understanding maternal evil. Michelle succeeded in killing her 7-year-old son Seth and nearly killed his older brother Sean before the young boy managed to escape and reveal his mother's horrific actions. Michelle Lynn Noble was born on April 7, 1973, in Atlantic City, New Jersey, to a middle-class family. Her childhood appeared unremarkable from the outside, with Michelle attending local schools and participating in typical activities like soccer and dance. However, family members would later reveal that Michelle exhibited concerning behaviors even as a child, including compulsive lying, manipulating situations to gain attention, and an inability to maintain genuine friendships. These traits would become more pronounced as she aged. Michelle attended Richard Stockton University in southern New Jersey, majoring in education with the stated goal of becoming an elementary school teacher. During her college years, she met Eugene Kehoe, a graduate student studying business administration. Gene, as he was known, came from a blue-collar family in Pennsylvania and was focused on building a stable career and family life. Despite some reservations from friends who found Michelle's personality difficult and attention-seeking, Gene and Michelle married in June 1997. The couple moved to Iowa, where Gene had secured a position in agricultural business management. They settled in the small community near the Nebraska border, purchasing a modest home where they planned to raise their family. Michelle abandoned her teaching ambitions and focused on being a homemaker, though neighbors noted she seemed unhappy with rural life and frequently complained about feeling isolated and bored. Michelle gave birth to their first son, Sean Kehoe, on March 12, 1999. The pregnancy and delivery were reportedly difficult, and Michelle experienced what doctors diagnosed as postpartum depression. She was prescribed antidepressants but frequently stopped taking them, claiming they made her feel different. The couple's second son, Seth Kehoe, was born on September 23, 2001, completing their family. As the boys grew, Michelle's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was obsessed with presenting a perfect family image to the outside world, posting carefully curated photos on early social media platforms and describing idyllic family activities that neighbors knew were exaggerated or fabricated entirely. She became controlling with the boys, particularly Seth, whom she viewed as an extension of herself. Meanwhile, she became distant and cold toward Sean, whom she blamed for various family problems. Gene worked long hours to support the family, often traveling for his agricultural business job, which left Michelle alone with the boys for extended periods. During these times, neighbors reported hearing Michelle yelling at the children and noticed the boys seemed fearful and anxious. On multiple occasions, teachers at the boys' school expressed concerns about possible emotional abuse, noting that the children, particularly Seth, seemed to walk on eggshells around their mother. However, Michelle was skilled at explaining away concerns and presenting herself as an overwhelmed but devoted mother doing her best. By 2008, the Kehoe marriage was deteriorating. Gene had discovered that Michelle had been lying about various aspects of their finances, including credit card debt she had hidden from him and purchases she had made without his knowledge. There were also suspicions that Michelle had been unfaithful, though this was never definitively proven. Gene told family members he was considering divorce, but wanted to wait until the boys were older, fearing Michelle would use them as weapons in a custody battle. What Gene didn't know was that Michelle was spiraling into a dark place, obsessively thinking about death, punishment, and escape from her life. Journal entries later discovered by police revealed disturbing fantasies about killing her children and herself to save them from an evil world, and to punish Gene for what she perceived as his failures as a husband. She wrote about starting over, and about how death would be peaceful for all of them. In October 2008, Michelle's planning became concrete. She researched suicide methods online, focusing on car exhaust asphyxiation and how to make it appear like an accident. She also researched life insurance policies, checking whether suicide would void the payout and whether the deaths of her children would result in benefits. These internet searches, recovered from her computer, demonstrated clear premeditation and a cold calculation that contradicted any later claims of temporary insanity. On October 26, 2008, Michelle executed her plan. That Sunday morning, she told Gene she was taking the boys on a special outing to enjoy the fall foliage. Gene, preparing for a business trip, was pleased that Michelle seemed to be making an effort with the children and thought nothing of it. He kissed the boys goodbye, never imagining it would be the last time he saw his youngest son alive. Michelle drove Sean, who was 9 years old, and Seth, who was 7, to a remote, wooded area near the Little Sioux River, about 40 miles from their home. She had scouted this location earlier in the week, selecting it specifically because it was isolated and rarely visited. She told the boys they were going on a nature hike and brought along a backpack containing duct tape, plastic bags, a knife, and twine, items that had no innocent explanation. Once deep in the woods, far from any road or potential witnesses, Michelle told the boys she wanted to play a game. What happened next was described in horrifying detail by Sean Kehoe in his testimony to police and later at trial. Michelle produced the duct tape and began wrapping it around Seth's wrists, ankles, and mouth, telling Sean this was part of the game. When Sean began to protest, scared by his brother's muffled cries, Michelle turned on him with a knife. She stabbed Sean multiple times in the throat and chest, then used duct tape to bind him as well. The 9-year-old boy, bleeding profusely and struggling to breathe through his injuries, watched as his mother tightened a plastic bag over Seth's face, suffocating his younger brother. Seth struggled against his restraints, his small body convulsing as he was denied oxygen, while Sean, though grievously wounded, was unable to help his brother and could barely comprehend what was happening. After confirming that Seth was dead, Michelle turned her attention back to Sean, tightening the plastic bag over his head as well. However, Sean's survival instinct and his older age gave him a slight advantage. Despite his wounds, he managed to tear at the plastic bag with his bound hands, creating a small hole that allowed him to breathe. Michelle, believing both boys were dead or dying, left them in the woods and returned to her vehicle. Here's where Michelle's plan revealed its true nature. She didn't drive home to kill herself, as she would later claim was her intention. Instead, she drove to a local restaurant parking lot and called 911, claiming she had been carjacked by 2 men who had attacked her and taken her sons. She had cut her own arm to create an injury consistent with an attack and had disheveled her clothing and appearance. She told a frantic story about fighting off attackers who wanted her vehicle and how they had driven away with her children in the car. Police responded immediately, launching a massive search operation based on Michelle's description of the carjacking. Amber alerts were issued, law enforcement from multiple counties mobilized, and volunteers organized search parties. Michelle played the role of desperate mother perfectly, crying and begging police to find her boys, providing detailed descriptions of the fictional carjackers, and appealing through media for her son's safe return. But while police were searching based on Michelle's false information, something miraculous was happening in the woods near the Little Sioux River. Sean Kehoe, despite catastrophic injuries to his throat and chest, despite being bound with duct tape and left for dead by his own mother, managed to free himself. The 9-year-old boy, driven by determination that defies explanation, worked for hours to free his hands from the duct tape, then freed his legs. He tried desperately to help his brother, but Seth was already gone, his small body cold and still. Sean, bleeding and in excruciating pain, staggered through the woods searching for help. He eventually found his way to a rural road where he flagged down a passing motorist, a local farmer named Robert Peterson, who was driving home from church. Peterson was shocked by the sight of the blood-covered child and immediately called 911. When paramedics arrived, Sean kept repeating, "My mom did this. My mom hurt us. Seth is still in the woods." Sean's revelation immediately changed the investigation. Police converged on the wooded area Sean described, and within hours they found Seth Kehoe's body, still bound with duct tape, the plastic bag that had suffocated him lying nearby. The scene was exactly as Sean had described it, leaving no doubt about what had happened. Officers were dispatched to arrest Michelle Kehoe, finding her still at the restaurant parking lot, maintaining her carjacking story even as investigators confronted her with her son's eyewitness account. Michelle was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping. Sean Kehoe, meanwhile, underwent emergency surgery for his wounds. The knife had narrowly missed his carotid artery, and the stab wounds to his chest had collapsed one lung, but miraculously, the 9-year-old boy survived. His physical recovery would take months, but the psychological wounds would never fully heal. He would forever carry the trauma of watching his mother murder his brother and knowing she had tried to kill him too. Michelle's defense team attempted to argue that she had experienced a psychotic break and was not responsible for her actions. They presented testimony from psychologists who diagnosed her with depression, anxiety, and possible borderline personality disorder. They claimed that Michelle had been planning a murder-suicide, and that abandoning Sean alive was evidence that she hadn't truly intended to kill her children, an argument prosecutors and the jury found laughably absurd given the physical evidence. The prosecution presented Michelle's internet search history, her journal entries fantasizing about killing her family, and most compellingly, Sean Kehoe's testimony. The brave young boy took the witness stand and calmly described watching his mother kill his little brother and attempt to kill him. He described how she had planned the outing, how she had brought supplies specifically for murder, and how she had left him to die in the woods. His testimony was so credible and devastating that several jurors were seen crying. On October 30, 2009, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Michelle Kehoe guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping. The verdict brought some measure of justice for 7-year-old Seth, whose life had been stolen by his mother, and for Sean, who would carry both physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. At sentencing on November 20, 2009, the judge sentenced Michelle to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus an additional 50 years for the attempted murder and kidnapping charges. Michelle showed little emotion during sentencing, maintaining the flat effect she had displayed throughout the trial. Gene Kehoe, who had attended every day of the trial, read a victim impact statement in which he described Seth as a joyful, loving child who trusted his mother completely. He spoke about Sean's ongoing recovery and the challenges of helping his surviving son process the trauma of what happened. He expressed his own profound guilt for not recognizing the danger Michelle posed to their children. Michelle Kehoe is currently incarcerated at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women in Mitchellville. Prison officials report that she is a model inmate who has never caused disciplinary problems. She spends much of her time in the prison library and has repeatedly requested mental health treatment, which she receives regularly. She has never admitted guilt for Seth's murder or the attempted murder of Sean, maintaining that she doesn't remember the events clearly due to her mental state at the time. Sean Kehoe, now a young man in his mid-20s, has shown remarkable resilience. He was raised by his father Gene, with support from extended family members. He has undergone extensive therapy to process the trauma of watching his mother kill his brother and surviving her attempt on his own life. In interviews conducted when he reached adulthood, Sean has spoken about his brother Seth, ensuring that people remember him as more than just a victim, that they remember him as a little boy who loved Legos and dinosaurs, who had a contagious laugh, who deserved to grow up. Sean has also spoken about the scars, both physical and emotional, that he will carry forever. The knife wounds on his throat and chest are visible reminders of his mother's betrayal, but the psychological wounds run deeper: trust issues, nightmares, and complex feelings about the woman who gave him life and then tried to take it away. Despite these challenges, Sean has pursued education and a career, determined not to let his mother's evil actions define his entire life. The case prompted discussions about postpartum depression, maternal mental illness, and the often inadequate responses to warning signs of violence in families. Teachers and neighbors who had noticed concerning behaviors in Michelle Kehoe carried guilt about not intervening more forcefully, though experts note that even trained professionals often struggle to identify which troubled parents will escalate to violence. Seth Kehoe's grave in the small Iowa cemetery is visited regularly by his father and brother, marked by a headstone that reads, "Seth Nathaniel Kehoe, Forever 7, beloved son and brother, you are safe now." The simple epitaph captures the tragedy of a child whose safety depended on the person who ultimately became his killer. Sean often leaves small dinosaur figures on the grave, Seth's favorite toys, a brother's tribute to a sibling he couldn't save. Michelle Kehoe's actions represent a profound violation of maternal duty and human decency. She planned the murder of her children methodically, executed her plan with cold calculation, and then attempted to deceive investigators with a fabricated story about carjacking, showing no concern for the son she believed was dying in the woods. The only thing that prevented her from being a double-child killer was the extraordinary courage and determination of a 9-year-old boy who refused to die, who fought his way to freedom despite wounds that should have been fatal, and who had the strength to tell the truth about what his mother had done. Today, Michelle Kehoe will spend every remaining day of her life in prison, never again knowing freedom, never again having the opportunity to harm anyone else. Her name has become synonymous with maternal evil, a cautionary tale about the danger of assuming that mothers are incapable of harming their own children. The tragedy of Seth Kehoe and the miraculous survival of Sean Kehoe serve as permanent reminders that evil can wear a familiar face, that violence can come from the hands that are supposed to protect and nurture, and that children's safety must never be taken for granted, even and especially within their own families. Case 7. Sherry Heffernan, The Burning Betrayal. On January 15, 1997, in Waunakee, Passaic County, firefighters responded to a house fire at the Heffernan residence. What they initially believed was a tragic accident would be revealed as a mother's deliberate attempt to murder her 3-year-old son because he had become an inconvenience to her lifestyle. Sherry Lynn Patterson was born on November 3, 1968, in Patterson, New Jersey. She dropped out of high school and had her daughter Christina in July 1988. In 1992, she met Dennis Heffernan, and they married in April 1993. In January 1994, Sherry gave birth to Michael Dennis Heffernan. The pregnancy was reportedly unplanned, and Sherry made no secret of her resentment about having another child. As Michael grew, Sherry's resentment intensified. She showed preferential treatment to Christina while largely ignoring Michael. Neighbors reported hearing Sherry yelling at the little boy, and Michael was sometimes seen with unexplained bruises. By 1996, Sherry had begun an affair with Robert Matthews. Phone records showed Sherry and Robert talked for hours daily, with Sherry complaining about being stuck at home with a kid. In late December, Dennis confronted Sherry about her affair, threatening divorce. Sherry, realizing divorce would mean caring for Michael as a single mother, began formulating a different solution. Her internet search history showed searches for house fire accidents, death of child in fire, life insurance for children, and can children survive house fires. On January 14, 1997, Dennis left for a week-long training program. Sherry dropped Christina off at her mother's house, claiming she needed a few days to herself. This ensured only Michael would be in the house. On the evening of January 15th, Sherry put 3-year-old Michael to bed around 7:30. Around 10 o'clock, she poured gasoline in a trail from Michael's bedroom door, down the hallway, and down the stairs. She returned to Michael's room, where he was sleeping, and poured gasoline around his bed. She looked at her sleeping son one final time, backed out of the room, lit a match, and set the gasoline trail on fire. The fire spread rapidly. Sherry watched from the first floor as smoke billowed from upstairs, then walked out, got in her car, and drove to a nearby park where she sat for approximately 30 minutes before calling 911. When she made the call at 10:48, Sherry claimed she had fallen asleep on the couch and woken to smell smoke. She said she tried to run upstairs to get Michael, but the fire was too intense. She was crying hysterically, screaming that her baby was trapped inside. Waunakee Fire Department responded within 8 minutes. It took over 2 hours to bring the blaze under control. When firefighters finally reached Michael's bedroom, they found his small body burned beyond recognition. The little boy had died of smoke inhalation. Arson investigators found the burn pattern consistent with an accelerant. Samples tested positive for gasoline residue. More significantly, there was no evidence Sherry had attempted to rescue her son. She showed no burn marks, no smoke damage, nothing consistent with someone who had tried to fight through fire to reach a child. Neighbors had seen Sherry's car leaving before the fire was reported. After 16 hours of interrogation on January 17th, Sherry Heffernan confessed. She admitted to pouring gasoline throughout the house, deliberately setting the fire while Michael slept, and driving away while flames consumed her son. She claimed she had been overwhelmed by motherhood and felt trapped. Investigators noted she showed more emotion about her relationship with Robert Matthews than about Michael's death. Sherry was charged with first-degree murder, arson, and child endangerment. Her trial began in October 1997. On November 20th, 1997, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Sherry Heffernan guilty on all counts. At sentencing on January 7th, 1998, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole, stating, You deliberately murdered your 3-year-old son by burning him alive in his own bed. Michael trusted you completely, and you betrayed that trust in the most brutal way imaginable. Sherry Heffernan is currently incarcerated at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. Michael's grave reads, Michael Dennis Heffernan, our little boy, safe in heaven's arms. Case 8. Lisette Bamenga, the boyfriend conspiracy. On December 4, 2008, in Willingboro, Burlington County, emergency services received a call from 20-year-old Lisette Bamenga, reporting that her 9-month-old son Jem had stopped breathing. The investigation would reveal a conspiracy between Lisette and her boyfriend Heffernan Peterson to murder an infant whose only crime was existing as a reminder of Lisette's previous relationship. Lisette Bamenga was born on February 19, 1988, in Newark, New Jersey, to parents who had immigrated from the Democratic Republic of Congo. At age 18, Lisette became pregnant by Marcus Thompson. The relationship ended shortly after. Jem Thompson was born on March 3, 2008. For the first few months, Lisette lived with her parents, who provided most of the child's care. In July 2008, Lisette met Heffernan Peterson, who was 22 with a criminal record. Despite red flags, Lisette was infatuated and moved into a small apartment with him, bringing Jem over her parents' objections. From the beginning, Heffernan resented Jem's presence. Text messages showed Heffernan repeatedly telling Lisette she had to choose between him and the baby. Rather than protecting her son, Lisette began viewing Jem as an obstacle to her happiness. By late November 2008, text messages between the couple had taken a dark turn. Heffernan sent messages like, "That baby needs to go, and there are ways to make this problem disappear." On December 1st, a text exchange showed clear planning for murder. Heffernan wrote, "When your parents come this weekend to get him, you should say no, and then we handle it." They discussed timing, what to tell emergency services, and disguising the murder as SIDS. On December 4th, 2008, before Lisette's parents could visit, she called 911 at 3:27 in the afternoon, reporting Jem had suddenly stopped breathing. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. What they found immediately raised suspicions. Jem had bruising around his throat, petechiae in his eyes consistent with asphyxiation, and lividity patterns suggesting he had been dead longer than Lisette claimed. There were no signs CPR had been attempted despite her claims. Jem was pronounced dead at 4:18 that afternoon. The autopsy revealed he died from asphyxiation, specifically from manual strangulation combined with smothering. The medical examiner estimated Jem had been dead 4 to 6 hours before Lisette called 911, completely contradicting her timeline. Investigators obtained search warrants for their phones. The text messages between Lisette and Heffernan planning Jem's murder were recovered, along with Lisette's internet searches about SIDS and how to fake it. On December 6, 2008, both were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Their trial began in September 2009. The prosecution presented the text messages, forensic evidence, and expert testimony. The jury heard Heffernan telling Lisette her baby needs to go, and Lisette responding with questions about logistics, not horror or refusal. On October 15, 2009, after deliberating for 8 hours, the jury found both guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. At sentencing on December 3, 2009, the judge sentenced both to life in prison without parole. Lisette Bamenga is currently incarcerated at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. Heffernan Peterson is serving his sentence at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Jem's grave reads, Jem Thompson, 9 months of joy, forever in our hearts, safe with the angels. Case 9, Ming Chen, the restaurant poisoner. In the heart of Newark's Ironbound district, the Chen family ran a small Chinese restaurant that had served the neighborhood for over a decade. To customers, Ming Chen appeared to be a dedicated mother and hardworking business owner. But behind the kitchen doors of Golden Dragon Restaurant, Ming Chen was methodically poisoning her 6-year-old daughter with antifreeze, causing the child excruciating suffering over months. When little Lily Chen finally died in March 2013, investigators would uncover one of the most calculated and prolonged cases of maternal murder in New Jersey history. Ming Chen was born on June 18, 1978, in Fujian Province, China. She immigrated to the United States in 1998 at age 20. In 2001, she met David Chun, and they married within 6 months. With loans from family, Ming and David opened Golden Dragon Restaurant in 2004. Their daughter, Lily Ming Chun, was born on September 9, 2006. A son, Kevin, was born 2 years later in November 2008. Ming had always craved attention and sympathy, frequently exaggerating minor problems to gain concern from friends and family. She posted constantly on Chinese-language social media platforms about the difficulties of running a business and raising children. Friends noted that Ming seemed happiest when people were worried about her or offering help. In early 2012, Ming began to fixate on a family she knew through their church whose daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. The community had rallied around the family, providing meals, financial support, and constant emotional encouragement. Ming observed the attention and sympathy this family received and became envious. She wanted to be the center of that kind of concern and support. In April 2012, Lily Chun, then 5 years old and perfectly healthy, suddenly became ill. She complained of stomach pain and began vomiting repeatedly. Ming took her to the emergency room at Newark Beth Israel Medical Center, where doctors ran tests but couldn't find a clear cause. Over the following weeks, Lily would have several more episodes of unexplained illness, each time followed by Ming posting dramatic updates on social media. By summer 2012, Lily was experiencing severe symptoms including vomiting, abdominal pain, confusion, and fatigue. She was hospitalized multiple times, with doctors conducting extensive testing to identify the cause. Throughout this period, Ming was the model of a devoted mother, staying by Lily's bedside and advocating tirelessly for her daughter. Hospital staff viewed Ming as an exemplary parent. What no one suspected was that Ming Chun was causing her daughter's illness. She had begun adding small amounts of antifreeze, which contains ethylene glycol, to Lily's drinks and food. Antifreeze has a sweet taste that can mask its presence, and ethylene glycol poisoning produces symptoms that mimic various illnesses. By poisoning Lily gradually, Ming created a pattern of mysterious illness that baffled doctors and generated exactly the sympathy and attention she craved. Ming documented Lily's illness extensively on social media, posting photos of her daughter in hospital beds, describing each symptom and setback, and accepting offers of support from their community. Members of their church organized meal trains, provided childcare for Kevin, and raised money to help with medical expenses. Ming basked in the attention. As Lily's condition worsened through late 2012 and into 2013, doctors became increasingly concerned. The child's kidney function was deteriorating, and she was experiencing neurological symptoms, including seizures. Throughout this period, Ming maintained her facade of desperate mother while secretly continuing to poison her. On March 14, 2013, 6-year-old Lily Chun died at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The official cause of death was listed as acute renal failure secondary to unknown toxic exposure. Ming's grief appeared genuine and overwhelming. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from the Newark Chinese community. But Dr. Patricia O'Neill, a pediatric nephrologist who had treated Lily, had noticed an unusual pattern. Lily's symptoms and lab values often worsened during or immediately after periods when Ming had been alone with her, and improved when Ming wasn't present. After Lily's death, Dr. O'Neill reported her concerns to law enforcement. An investigation was opened. Investigators obtained authorization to test samples of Lily's blood and tissue that had been preserved during her medical treatment. The results were shocking. High levels of ethylene glycol were found in multiple samples dating back over a year. Lily Chun had not died from a mysterious illness. She had been systematically poisoned by her own mother. Investigators obtained search warrants for the Chun home and restaurant. They found bottles of antifreeze stored in unusual locations, including in the kitchen near food preparation areas. More damningly, they found Ming's social media posts and discovered that Ming had been researching ethylene glycol poisoning on her computer, searching for information about symptoms, detection methods, and lethal doses. On May 2, 2013, Ming Chun was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began in March 2014 in Essex County Superior Court. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of systematic poisoning. Medical experts testified about the ethylene glycol found in Lily's preserved tissue samples and explained how the poisoning would have caused Lily's symptoms. Dr. O'Neill testified about her suspicions and the pattern she had observed. The jury heard testimony about antifreeze found in the Chun home and Ming's internet search history. They reviewed Ming's extensive social media posts, which prosecutors argued showed her motivation. She wanted attention, sympathy, and to be seen as a heroic mother coping with tragedy. On April 22, 2014, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Ming Chen guilty of first-degree murder. At sentencing on June 5, 2014, the judge sentenced Ming Chen to life in prison without the possibility of parole, stating, "You systematically poisoned your 6-year-old daughter over the course of more than a year, causing her excruciating suffering, solely to gain attention and sympathy for yourself. You will never leave prison." Ming Chen is currently incarcerated at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women. She maintains her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. Lily Chen's grave in Rosedale Cemetery reads, "Lily Ming Chen, forever in our hearts." Case 10, Joyce Williams, The Ultimate Betrayal. In January 2019, in the city of Camden, New Jersey, Joyce Williams murdered her 12-year-old daughter Brianna in a fit of rage over the child's academic performance, beating her so severely that she died from her injuries. What made the case particularly horrifying was not just the brutality of the crime, but Joyce's calculated attempts to cover it up and the revelation that Brianna had endured years of escalating abuse, while Child Protective Services repeatedly failed to intervene despite multiple reports. Joyce Marie Williams was born on January 20, 1984, in Camden, New Jersey, to parents who struggled with addiction and poverty. Joyce spent much of her childhood in foster care after being removed from her parents' custody due to neglect. She aged out of the system at 18 with minimal support or life skills. She had her first child, a daughter named Brianna, at age 22 in 2006. Brianna's father was not involved, and Joyce struggled as a young single mother. By 2019, Joyce was living in public housing in Camden's Kramer Hill neighborhood with all 4 of her children, surviving on government assistance. From an early age, Brianna bore the brunt of her mother's frustrations and anger. As the oldest child, she was expected to help care for her younger siblings, often missing school to babysit. Teachers noted that Brianna was frequently absent, often appeared tired and hungry, and sometimes had unexplained bruises or marks. Between 2012 and 2018, New Jersey's Division of Child Protection and Permanency received at least 7 reports of suspected abuse or neglect in the Williams household. School personnel reported concerns about Brianna's frequent absences, apparent malnutrition, and suspicious injuries. Neighbors reported hearing Joyce screaming at her children and sounds of physical violence. Medical professionals expressed concerns about possible abuse. Each time, a caseworker would investigate, interview Joyce, inspect the home, and ultimately close the case without removing the children. Despite the chaos of her home life, Brianna was intelligent and motivated to succeed academically. She saw education as her pathway out of poverty and away from her mother's abuse. Her teachers described her as resilient and determined, though they noted signs of trauma and stress. However, Joyce viewed Brianna's academic focus as a form of disrespect. She would frequently berate Brianna for spending time on homework instead of watching her siblings or cleaning the apartment. In January 2019, Brianna received her report card for the second quarter of 7th grade. She had mostly B's and 1 C in mathematics, grades that most parents would consider respectable. But Joyce fixated on the C grade, viewing it as unacceptable and a reflection of Brianna's supposed laziness and disrespect. On the evening of January 22, 2019, Joyce confronted Brianna about the grade, and the confrontation escalated into violence that would end in murder. According to later statements from Brianna's younger siblings, who witnessed the attack, Joyce began by screaming at Brianna about the math grade. When Brianna tried to explain that the material was challenging, Joyce slapped her across the face. When Brianna began to cry, Joyce became more enraged. The beating escalated rapidly. Joyce punched Brianna repeatedly in the face, head, and body. When Brianna fell to the floor, Joyce kicked her in the ribs and back. She grabbed Brianna's head and slammed it against the wall multiple times. She picked up a wooden broom handle and struck Brianna with it repeatedly. Throughout the assault, which lasted approximately 20 minutes, Brianna's younger siblings screamed and begged their mother to stop. When Joyce finally stopped, Brianna was unconscious, bleeding from her head and face, and breathing irregularly. Rather than calling for medical help immediately, Joyce tried to wake Brianna up. When Brianna didn't respond, Joyce began to cover up the crime. She instructed Brianna's siblings that they would tell authorities Brianna had fallen down the stairs in their apartment building, coaching them on exactly what to say and threatening them with similar beatings if they told the truth. She then waited several hours before calling 911. Paramedics arrived at approximately 11:45 that night, over 3 hours after the beating occurred. They found 12-year-old Brianna Williams in cardiac arrest, with massive head trauma, broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, and extensive bruising covering her body. Brianna was rushed to Cooper University Hospital in Camden, but the injuries were too severe. She was pronounced dead at 2:17 in the morning on January 23, 2019. Hospital staff immediately notified the Camden County Prosecutor's Office about the suspicious nature of Brianna's injuries. When Detective Maria Rodriguez spoke separately with Brianna's younger siblings and assured them they were safe, they revealed what had really happened. They described in heartbreaking detail watching their mother beat their sister to death. Joyce Williams was arrested on January 23 and charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, child endangerment, and witness tampering. Her 3 surviving children were immediately placed in protective custody. The autopsy confirmed that Brianna had died from blunt force trauma to the head and internal injuries consistent with severe beating. Joyce's trial began in September 2019 in Camden County Superior Court. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Joyce's guilt. The medical examiner testified about the extensive injuries Brianna had sustained. Brianna's siblings testified via video deposition, describing what they had witnessed. Teachers testified about the bright, determined girl they had known. On October 18, 2019, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury found Joyce Williams guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, child endangerment, and witness tampering. At sentencing on December 10, 2019, the judge sentenced Joyce Williams to life in prison without the possibility of parole, stating, "Brianna Williams was a child full of potential and promise. You murdered her for getting a C in mathematics. You beat your 12-year-old daughter to death because she didn't meet your academic expectations." Joyce Williams is currently incarcerated at Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women, where she will remain for the rest of her life. Her surviving children are receiving therapy to address the trauma. Brianna's grave in Harley Cemetery in Camden reads, "Brianna Marie Williams, scholar and dreamer, your light will never fade." These 10 cases represent some of the darkest chapters in New Jersey's criminal history. 10 mothers who violated the most fundamental human bond, who took the lives of the children who trusted them completely. From WANETA HOYT suffocating 5 infants, to Michelle Lodzinski's son found in a marsh, to Carmen Mercado drowning her child in a bathtub, to the conspiracy between Lisette Bamenga and her boyfriend, to Ming Chen's calculated poisoning, to Sherry Heffernan burning her son alive, to Tanya Nelson's starving Isaiah to death, to Patricia Williams drowning for insurance money, to Sandra Jackson's medication murders, and finally to Joyce Williams beating Brianna to death over a report card. Each case demonstrates the unfathomable evil that can exist behind a mother's face. These women will never see freedom again, and that is exactly as it should be. They betrayed the trust of the most vulnerable among us. They destroyed innocent lives that depended on them. They proved that the most dangerous place for some children isn't on the streets or in the hands of strangers, but in their own homes with the people who gave them life. If these cases have moved you, disturbed you, or made you think about the importance of protecting vulnerable children, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Hit that like button if you appreciate the deep research we put into these documentaries. And most importantly, subscribe to Cold Case Time and turn on notifications so you never miss our investigations into true crime's most compelling mysteries. Remember, if you suspect a child is being abused or neglected, please report it to your local authorities or child protective services. One call could save a life. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember that justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually finds those who harm the innocent. This has been Cold Case Time. Thank you for watching.